Happy Monday if you're watching live. It is a gorgeous morning to rise and shine. Look at that. The lake is like glass today. Wow. Wow. So quiet. I almost hate to start talking just because I'm going to disrupt the peace. Okay, I read Luke chapter 7 this morning, and we're going to talk a little bit about logic. We're going to speak logically, or logically speaking. You hear people say that phrase a lot. And in general, it means I'm going to speak in a way that makes sense. But it really depends on your starting point and how you look at things and perspective and how logic works also. And just because something is logical doesn't mean it's right either. We can talk in circles as humans. And that's exactly like the thread that I was picking up on in chapter 7. Chapter 7 starts off with a story about a Roman soldier. And this Roman soldier has a highly valued Jewish slave or servant who is ill. And the Roman soldier sends his other servants to get some healing for this man. And so Jesus says, okay, I'll do it. And they're like, this dude is good. Like, he helps the Jewish people. So Jesus, I really think you should go and heal this servant for this man, because he's doing good things for our people. So Jesus, he's on his way. It sounds like he's almost at the house when the Roman soldier sends somebody else out and says, hey, I know how authority works. And if I am one who is under authority, and I know that when he says go, people go. When you say do this, do that, they do it. And I'm also in a position of authority. And when I say do this, do that, people do it. I don't actually have to go and tell them in person. I can even just send my people and it will be done. So I understand, and you're a man of authority, so you don't even need to come into my presence. I am not worthy. If you say this man can be healed, you just heal him where you are. You don't need to come, because I don't want to impose on your authority. I understand who I am in relationship to you. I understand how much authority you have. Just heal. If you say the word, it'll just be done. You don't have to be there. And Jesus says, I tell you, he turns and declares, he goes, I have not seen a person of such faith. He gets it. He gets it. And so his starting point of logic is from a position of authority, not as a human saying, oh, I am in authority and therefore you need to come and serve me, which that is a tendency of a lot of our logic. I am in a position, we think from our own position, but this soldier starts from an even higher, truer position of truth. Let's just understand the concept of authority and how it works. And based on my logic and my understanding of authority, and if I believe enough to send people to Jesus to see if this man can be healed, obviously I am hoping and believing that Jesus is who he says he is. And if he is who he says he is, then the healing can take place in this way, because of my understanding of authority. And then we circle back, and of course the the slave or servant does receive healing, and Jesus does just as this man asks. He just sends the word. When they get back, the man is healed. And so then we move into some stories about the Pharisees. The Pharisees, they can't see the forest for the trees. They are stuck. They are stuck, but they're not wrong. They're not technically wrong based on their starting position of logic. They're looking at the rule of law. And of course, Jesus comes to bust up the rule of law. And because even after years and years and years in the Old Testament of them trying to get, God trying to get the people to understand the spirit of the law, they cannot get past the literal written law and just sticking to the rule of law. They just can't get it. So Jesus comes literally filled with the Holy Spirit to teach them the spirit of the law. And still, I mean, they are so focused on seeing it their way and the potential and the fear of getting it wrong that they miss the miracle that's right in front of them, which I'm going to show you a little bit different perspective today. Beautiful. Gosh, it's like glass, you guys. Those of you that are on camera, beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. I'm going to give a couple of personal examples as I was even thinking this morning. And I have a beautiful home. I'm so blessed. And I have a lot of, you all can imagine, because I love to walk in the park every day. I love trees. And I love being around trees. And my dream is to one day even to have my house just surrounded by trees. But right now, that's not the case. But I do, and I have a neighbor in my backyard. Nothing against the neighbor. But, you know, I look straight back out my back and I just see another house. And sometimes I get a little like, you know, a little bit spoiled about it. But if I turn my head either way, and I do post pictures of this sometimes, there's trees. There's trees all around me if I just shift my perspective. And if I even shift my chair, sometimes I get so locked into a certain way of thinking, like literally like a linear way of thinking, like I need to come out here and my chair needs to face this way and I want trees to be right there. I'm not even dealing in reality. And then I'm getting frustrated by my reality versus my other reality is I can also just shift my chair. Oh, here is a really good example. Let's just look at where I'm standing on a dock. Right in front of me, there are no trees. And if I wanted to look right at a tree, I could stand here and be frustrated. Even though I see one, you know, just to this is kind of an extreme example, but pretend this was wider and I didn't have that tree or that tree or those trees back there. It's just, you know, it just doesn't meet exactly what I want. But look, if I just turn a few degrees, I would see nothing but trees. And also this way. That's kind of what it's like at my house. So that's what I did this morning. I turned my chair, and that way I didn't have to turn my head and look at the trees. I just turned and faced the trees. Like, this is the logic of humans, though, sometimes that we get stuck in. This is the way it is. This is the way it should be. And it's not what I think it should be. And rather than shifting our perspective, changing the angle at which we're looking at it, and even looking at the result, which that's where we're going in the next story that Jesus tells or uses as an example. He starts talking about John the Baptist in the next story. Good morning, friend. And and talking about John's authority and him coming before him and, you know, even quoting scripture. Then he circles back to the Pharisees to point out the fallacy in their perspective and the logic that they're using. And he even catches them in their circular logic of, and only being focused on the rules. And John the Baptist, we know have already been introduced to. He was called to live in the wilderness for a while to keep his perspective and his, role and calling strong, to not be distracted by the outside world, to keep him, and also, we were told that he can't have things like wine, nothing to disrupt his calling and his purpose or his spirit or take him off his path, because his path he was the way maker for the way maker. So he is kept pure. Well, the Pharisees aren't happy with John because they're like, well, he doesn't eat and drink, so he must be demon possessed. And then, of course, they look at Jesus, who eats and drinks, feasts even with the sinners, and eats and drinks wine. And they look at him and pretty much say the same thing. And he's like, you can't have it both ways. Your logic, you're catching yourself in your own logic, because they're so focused on the rule and only looking at this way that they won't. And then he ends that section of the story with that example with, just look at the evidence. Look at the evidence of people that are choosing to believe me and believe God and go our way. Look, their lives are bearing fruit. Look. The wisdom is right in front of you, and you refuse. You are so focused on the rule of law and following the rules, and this way that you cannot see the forest for the trees. God himself is sitting right in front of you, and you're accusing him of being a demon, and John the Baptist. Like, what in the world? You can just see him kind of forehead slapping, like, I don't know if they did that back then, but he's like, you don't even get it. Your own logic, because you won't shift and be open, you're missing it. You're missing literally God right in front of you. And anyway, so we go on to the final story in chapter 7. And hold on for just a second. Let my memory jog here. The logic of that they're getting caught in with humans versus God. And Jesus is invited to dinner at a Pharisee's house. I think we're told his name is Simon. And then we're introduced to a woman of sin who comes in behind him at the dinner table and gets on her knees and begins to wash Jesus's feet. She's crying. Her tears are washing his feet, and she's pouring very expensive perfume, and then using her hair to not only clean his feet with her tears. Yes. And yes, we miss God right in front of us, like literally, like we are so fixated on our own perspective in our own lives, in the world according to us, that yes, we often miss miracles that are right in front of us. And not just miracles, but even just everyday, like, evidence. And the evidence is in front of us, and we're over here focused on this and looking to prove and find the evidence that supports our logic. And God's saying, get out of your own heads and your own way and look at it from my perspective. And that's exactly what we get introduced to with this woman. Of course, the Pharisee is like, do you know who you're allowing to touch you? Oh my gosh, this is a woman of sin. Like, he is so like, Jesus, you're going to get corrupted by this woman just by virtue of her touching you. How can you let this happen? And we're told in this part of the story that this is all in the Pharisee's head. Jesus being Jesus, he knows what's in his head. He's reading his thoughts, and he says, hey, answer me this question. So he uses logic his logic, true logic, and from the right starting point and perspective to show the good news, the truth, and to point out the fallacy in the Pharisees' logic. And says, let's say there were two men, and one had taken a loan out of 50 cents and the other $500. And the person who lent the money forgave both debts. Who do you think would be more grateful? Oh, he's like, oh, easy. The guy who borrowed $500. Totally. He goes, yes, you're right. So he uses his own logic against him. And see, this is what has happened here. And he forgives the woman of her sins right in front of her. Who is able to love more? The person who's been forgiven of a lot or only a little? And then what he doesn't tell us here, but if we're using our own logic as readers and reading even beyond it, if this Pharisee was able to see the truth of the logic, if Jesus was able to open his heart and his eyes in this moment, don't you think he would have dropped on his knees right then and joined that woman? Because he was caught in the act of being just as sinful as this woman, if not even more. But because he thought of himself as righteous and someone who only sinned a little bit. Oh boy, this is big stuff, y'all. Logic. Don't be trapped by your own logic, by what you see right in front of you, and not being willing to turn your head, flip things upside down. And that's what Jesus came to do. He literally came to turn things upside down. And if we won't turn ourselves upside down and look at it, if we were hard-hearted, and if we can't soften our hearts and get down low and humble ourselves, and we are just striving to be good and following the rules, just by virtue of doing that, we are freaking, I want to cuss right now to watch myself. We are that Pharisee. We are that sinner. Every time we look at somebody else and we go, oh yeah, and a lot of us in the Christian world and in Christianese like to think of ourselves as very loving and very forgiving and, oh, I'm so good. Oh, la, 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 la. And we're walking around judging all the time. And you know what? We really can't help it. We are human. And Jesus constantly reminds us throughout the New Testament, with man, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. And it's slowing down your pace of life enough, allowing God into the moments, that praying continuously doesn't mean you're on your knees and you're not actually living life. It's slow to speak, slow to anger, allowing yourself time to go, what would God do here before you react in your humanness? How would God see this? And I am a woman who, and I'm still in the process of being humbled by it. I catch myself all the time. I have been freed from over drinking, and I'm going to turn around and go this way just so, sometimes with other walkers, I don't like to impose on them. Anyway, but I have tried to, soften. Well, I really didn't drink too much. I wasn't as bad as some other people that drink too much. But the truth is, it was messing with my life. I was like every morning waking up full of shame and regret, low energy. I was caught in a cycle. I was enslaved by this thing, by this habit. And I struggled to find my way out. But once I did, But I've had a hard time kind of talking. Like, I talk about it, but I like to soften it a little, if you know what I mean. Like, I like to look at myself as the one who's only been forgiven of 50 cents versus, you know, a million sins. And, you know, I'm trying to really come to grips with that and be even more humble and more honest. Like, and it doesn't mean, and this is what we do as humans a lot. Yes, focus on the eternal. Are there people that were more addicted than me and had gotten to a position in life where their addiction even disrupted their life more than mine? Yes, we can always compare and always make ourselves probably look better. Or, depending on our perspective, we can make ourselves look worse. But we don't need to look side to side to other humans. We need to look in the mirror and within and up, or wherever, you know, however you symbolize your relationship with God. Often, you know, we do that, but anyway, God within. And if you're convicted and you know you're living not in a healthy or right or honoring way, and it is completely about the self, and you are so enslaved by yourself, and that you can't get out of yourself. And that's really what is at the heart of addiction. It is a form of like selfishness. We become victims of ourselves and of life. And God came to free us and to show us what real freedom looks like, which is being free of the fear of man and a healthy fear of God. And once I was able to start being honest with myself and admitting, like, this is a problem. This is a problem for me. It's the only person and it was starting to spill out in some of my relationships, and because I was grumpy and mad at myself, and I was starting to take it out on other people, and relationships were it's just toxic. This is the human way of living that we get caught up in, and whatever your hang up is, or the thing you're overdoing or underdoing, or whatever we go to extremes on, is not healthy, even when it's supposedly in the healthy category. Oh, yes, forgiven beyond the capacity to forgive ourselves. That's a good one. Amen. But when we can't offer forgiveness that we can't receive. And that's where pride and selfishness and all those things come in and block and that humanness of it. And when we let that go, it feels scary. It feels threatening. And yet, when you begin to do that and walk in that freedom, oh my gosh, I feel like the woman that wants to get down. But honestly, down on her knees and crying and kissing the feet of Jesus and wiping his feet with her hair, like what an intimate, and yet currently I think I'm much more like the Pharisee. Hey, good morning. Yes, I probably need to hop off too and go, I think I'm going to do a full walk outside today in this gorgeous weather. But I think currently I'm still more like the Pharisee than I am like the woman on the floor and at the feet of Jesus. But working on getting myself out of that. And yesterday I ended my writing with a question that I've been using a lot to help me. And I really thank God for this question. Like literally, I think he gave it to me to help me to simplify and allow that continual praying. Like to me, this is a continual prayer. If I can catch myself in a moment. And what real logic is a question asking myself, what would love do or say here? Not my human version of love, but like the real love, like God love, agape. What would love do here? And that is a really good prayer, self-coaching question. At least it's been helping me. So feel free to use it. And it helps me get my perspective and my head turned to look at another way. And to get humble. Humility is step one. Humility, humbleness, honesty, all the H's. You're not going to get anywhere in your faith walk if you can't first lay down your pride. And it's a process. But brick by brick, step by step, and as you see, you're not going to die by admitting that you don't have it together. And brick by brick, you will also feel, maybe I shouldn't use a brick as the analogy, but as you unlink those chains or break those chains one by one and start really feeling what freedom tastes and feels like, you will be like, okay, where else can I find pride in my life so I can start putting it down? And then you'll get resistance because we're human. You'll look for it and you'll see it and then you'll be like, ooh, I don't know if I'm ready for that. So keep praying, keep walking it out. Yes, walking in freedom, because that's what love, true love is and what it provides. And letting go of the fear of man, fear of yourself, fear of your other people in your life. All right, I have yammered on enough today. You know, I could just keep going and going. God's love is so good. You can just talk about it all day long. But have a great day, whatever day it is for you, whatever. And now I'm surrounded by trees. We started with that, and now I can't not see a tree in my field of view. So it's all about perspective and getting out in there and not being fixated and fixed in one way of looking at things. Open your heart, open your minds, and experience love. All right, rise and shine, and bugs come with it too.